Welcome back, dear viewers. Now it's time for our daily press review, and we are joined here in the studio with Ms. Sama Eissa. She's an international law expert. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we start off from اليوم السابع newspaper, and we read the following headline. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi participates in the first National Youth Conference. The first National Youth Conference kicks off on Tuesday in Sharm el-Sheikh with the participation of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. President el-Sisi has already called 2016 as the year of Egyptian youth. About 3,000 Egyptian youths from different fields are expected to participate in the conference to discuss current issues as well as the future of the country. The first promo of the conference was released online and its website was launched. The youth will come from different fields, sectors and governorates, with many officials and MPs attending as well as other public figures. The conference will include about 23 public discussion sessions, including political, social, economic and cultural fields. The conference will also include many workshops. A group of political parties declared their participation in the conference. So, Sama, what is the significance of holding such conferences, and how do you read the title of this conference, Innovate Go?
Well, of course, the title is very promising,
Yes.
where there is a platform that exists where youth are included.
Yes.
Like, if we focus on the Egyptian population, almost 20 million are youth.
Yes.
And 26 out of these 20 million are unemployed, which is significantly a large percent. Therefore, having a platform in which the youth and the decision makers are together is something that should be not abused, but should be used to the maximum. Whereas you have a platform, you have the youth, you have the... As you're reading the news, you said the word discussing. Maybe this word should be replaced by decisions. So you have the youth who have the inspiration, you can listen to their vision, and you have the decision maker with the expertise in the tools. So here I want to take the news or this event into having a successful outcome. Yes. For instance, they can have a document, produce a document where the youth, along with the decision makers, can discuss what can be done for the country that would be beneficial for the youth in different sectors: economic sector, financial sector, culture. And we have something like a supervision. For instance, create a committee in which the document that produced have someone to supervise it as a committee, and they can meet annually and see what have been accomplished.
Yes.
And what has not been done yet. I think the conferences with youth and everything, to get away from the cliche idea and turn this into something beneficial for the country and for the youth.
Yes. And moving to Al-Akhbar newspaper, and we read President Fattah al-Sisi met on Monday with a U.S. business delegation headed by U.S. Ambassador David Thorne, the senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State for Economic Affairs. The delegation included representatives of about 50 of the major U.S. companies operating in various sectors. President al-Sisi welcomed the U.S. delegation and stressed the importance of the strategic relations between Egypt and the United States. The president said that Egypt is looking forward to boosting cooperation with the new U.S. administration regarding issues of common interest, so that both countries can face current regional and international challenges. President al-Sisi also referred to a series of meetings he had held last month in New York with representatives of the U.S. business community and how those meetings resulted in new cooperation opportunities. The president also reviewed the national projects being implemented. On top of them, the Suez Canal Development Project, as well as the government's efforts to implement more economic reforms. So what's the importance of this meeting ahead? How do you evaluate U.S.-Egyptian relations at this stage?
At this stage, I think we need to get away from the mentality like it's a charity to work when
Yes.
we come to cooperating with other partners. It means we need to create a win-win situation.
Yes.
In which it's beneficial for all.
Right.
So, for instance, you've mentioned in your news, President Sisi went to New York and met with the U.S. Business delegation before. But does anyone come back and tell us precisely what happened? Were there supervision to follow up on the things that were an outcome out of this meeting? So here I'm talking about creating a win-win situation,
Yes.
benefits for all. So when the other parties have common interests, they will cooperate and a boost will happen by default. Instead of having this charity mentality where we need a loan, we need help, we need to be together cooperating actually with mutual interests.
And still with Al Akhbar newspaper, and we read the Speaker of the House of Representatives addresses the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Dr. Ali Abdelal, emphasized that human rights violations are closely linked to the outbreak of conflicts and the spread of violence. He added that there is always a correlation between conflicts and human rights, which necessitated the amendment of the international humanitarian law to preserve human rights during armed conflicts. During his speech before the Inter-Parliamentary Union meeting in Geneva, Dr. Ali Abdelal pointed out that these violations have become an impediment to reach a satisfactory settlement of the conflicts. He added that if we agree on the need to protect human rights and to prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes, we must admit that there is a contrast between the countries of the North and South in addressing this matter, which requires the protection of habits and peculiarities of countries. Dr. Abdelal warned that there are some who exploit these differences to interfere in the affairs of the countries under the pretext of protecting human rights. So how do you read his speech?
Well, I share the same mentality when
Yes.
it comes to human rights violation, and human rights actually sometimes can be used as an illusion of savior,
Yes.
in which a lot of countries use it as an undercover to justify their own
to
personal
interfere in
interest,
other countries'
interfere in
affairs,
other
yes.
countries' affairs. And this comes into something that is a milestone that should not be questionable, is the legitimacy. If a country is legitimate, human right does not have the legitimacy to interfere in other personal affairs of another countries. Whereas even in the United Nations Security Council, any armed conflict and any armed human rights savior, as they claimed it happened unilaterally without the consent of the Security Council, had drastic results in
Yes.
the end. And we have several examples, like for instance the example of Kosovo, Tanzania,
Yes,
and
and
what
what's
happened in
taking
Russia
place.
and Georgia.
Yes.
And after a while, history revealed that it was not humanitarian right at all. It was only a cover, like a mask to justify their personal interests. For instance, for the case of Russia and the Georgia, everyone knows it's a human rights claim, and they had all the justification. It happened unilaterally. They went solo without the consent of the Security Council. Hence, there is a huge question mark. I'm not against defending other people or other nations that are being, like, they're suffering. Someone has to step in. But the legitimacy of other sovereign state is a milestone in international law, and no one should step on it. That's why, for instance, I was mentioning the case of Russia. Afterwards, it revealed that during this duration, the European Union wanted to substitute Russia with Georgia for getting their gas pipelines, because Russia provides European Union with gas, and this gives them an influence, not just economically, also politically over European Union, and they wanted to get rid of it. What happened? Russia knew. Hence, Russia did the staged attack on Georgia as if it's a case of human rights violation and it's a humanitarian intervention. But after a while, it revealed that nothing humanitarian was going on about it anymore. They just took over Georgia, so they screwed up the deal for the European Union, which was aiming to get Russia out of the picture. Hence, in the end, you tell me this is a humanitarian intervention and we're protecting human rights. No, the same with Kosovo, the same with Tanzania.
Yes.
So I definitely agree with what he said in the statement. Therefore, there need to be some rules, some mandate, some consequences that hinders this act, because it steps on human rights, because it creates more human rights violation after the intervention than before the intervention. This is one. Second, you step on the state sovereignty, which is a milestone in international law. This cannot be allowed. It messes up with the system, and it creates a very chaotic international system. So I definitely agree with what he said. Therefore, the Security Council needs to have more, and not just more, it needs to have consequences for countries that do violate human rights and step on other states' sovereignty.
Yes. And moving to اليوم السابع newspaper, and we read Prime Minister meets with the chief executives of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Prime Minister Sharif Ismail met on Monday with the chief executives of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The meeting, which was attended by Minister of International Cooperation, Dr. Sahar Nasr, comes to discuss the bank's business strategy in Egypt, especially with what the government is doing in the economic reform program. The Prime Minister welcomed the visit of the delegation and presented the executive position of the program, which includes boosting and developing the private sector through improving and upgrading infrastructure efficiency, providing an attractive investment climate, financing small and medium projects, and the imposition of value-added tax, as well as directing the subsidy to those who deserve it. Prime Minister stressed the government keenness to monitor the implementation of the program gradually in conjunction with taking social protection measures for the most needy. So to what extent these visits by foreign officials, top foreign officials, reflects their trust in Egypt's economy?
Of course, it reflects that there is confidence and trust, and the government needs to work more in enhancing such cooperation and such trust, because it's very beneficial in the country, especially in the critical phase Egypt is facing economically nowadays. So we need more of such visits, we need more of such enhancements, and we need a follow-up.
Yes. And moving to Nile News, and we read Minister of Defense meets Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation. Minister of Defense and General Commander of the Armed Forces, First Lieutenant General Sidqi Subhi, met with the Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, Jose Manuel Margallo, and his accompanying delegation, which is currently visiting Egypt. The meeting dealt with ways of enhancing aspects of joint cooperation between the armed forces of the two countries in many fields, in light of the special relations which combine the two friendly countries. The Minister of Defense praised the visit, which comes out of the lasting keenness of the two countries to support links of cooperation and consultation in many positions and various issues of common interest. So how do you evaluate Egyptian-Spanish cooperation in different fields and in military field in particular?
In the military field, of course, coalition and alliance is always beneficial, it's always needed, especially for the combat of terrorism. And I think this shed lights on that we need, again, more of such cooperation. And the war against terrorism it's fatal and it's inevitable. So there's no way you're going to survive fighting and combating terrorism solo. So I think building alliances with common grounds, such as what's happening with Spain, is very beneficial for the country in the long term.
And moving to Al Akhbar newspaper, and we read Minister of Petroleum said that Egypt signed 70 new oil exploration deals in 3 years. Minister of Petroleum Tariq Al-Mullah said that oil is an essential element of national security and plays an important role as a main source to meet the energy needs of all sectors of the state. During his meeting with the Nasser Military Academy students, the minister pointed out that Egypt has signed 70 oil exploration agreements during the last 3 years, with investments amount to $15 billion. The Minister of Petroleum said that Egypt's petroleum sector strategy is based on a number of dimensions. So how do you evaluate the country's efforts to boost the country's productivity and reserves of oil and gas through developing exploration activities?
How I see it, desperate need of income, and we do need it, especially in this stage, because Egypt's income that's coming from more than one sector is declining recently. For instance, terrorism have affected our tourists. So, for instance, for terrorism, it has a fatal effect on tourism. This is something that inclined the income of Egypt recently. We have the foreign currency that comes from Egyptians that living abroad, and the economic status of Egypt. That's why we need to have income coming internally from the country itself. So the oil exploration is going to be very beneficial, not just economically, but also on the long run is going to give Egypt a political influence. For instance, the example I said earlier about Russia and its relationship within the European Union. It's having this influence because it supplies them with gas. So if Egypt started to be a key player when it comes to petroleum and oil, it won't only benefit the country internally and give us more income leverage, it also is going to benefit the country on the long term politically within the arena, and we're going to be key player within the political map. So we need more of this, more explanation, and they need to explore more, of course.
And moving to Al Shuru newspaper, and we read Russia rules out early renewal of Aleppo ceasefire. Russia on Monday ruled out early moves to renew its ceasefire in Aleppo after a brief truce ended, blaming failures by the US-led coalition and hopes for diplomacy. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rabakov told Interfax, a news agency, that the question of renewing the humanitarian pause is not relevant now. More details in the following report.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry voiced concern to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Monday about renewed fighting and airstrikes in the Syrian city of Aleppo after a break of several days. Lavrov and Kerry discussed the situation in Syria in a phone call and agreed that experts from several countries meeting in Geneva would continue searching for ways to resolve the Aleppo crisis. Lavrov told Kerry the United States must fulfill its obligation to separate moderate opposition groups from terrorists in Syria. During the call, Kerry expressed concern about the renewal of airstrikes and ground attacks in Aleppo by Syrian government forces and their Russian supporters after a pause in the fighting for several days. The United States and Russia launched the multilateral talks after the ceasefire. The negotiated collapsed in September. Afterwards, the United States broke off those bilateral talks, with Russia accusing Moscow of not living up to its commitments.
Back to you, Sama. So how do you see the situation in Aleppo now?
Okay, how I see it is that, like, let's just go to the root cause.
Yes.
This is how I view things.
Yes.
Like, for the root cause is that for the entire struggle is that the terrorist groups need to be separated from the ones that are not targeted. And Russia has been invited by the legitimate government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. That's why the records have been leaked recently, having the US government saying that they cannot interfere because they don't have the legitimate go or green card in order to interfere, which just shows us that we are on the right track, where we are speaking earlier about human rights violation and interference. So I see the situation is that for order the problems to be solved, negotiation and mediating between parties need to be established. And I don't see this happening with the United States supporting and funding terrorism in Syria. On the other hand, they do not want to separate the terrorist group from the ones that they're not aimed to be target. Hence, when Russia get the go and, like, they're invited, as I said earlier, from Bashar al-Assad, and they have the legitimacy. So the humanitarian part saying you targeted elements that were not supposed to be targeted in the first place, we go back to you need to separate them. This is the root cause. And the United States does not want to separate them, so they use the innocents as a shield. Hence, we have one problem. And the second problem is the fact that the United States are funding the terrorist group. So the funds need to stop, negotiations need to happen, and at the same time, they need to separate the terrorists from the innocent ones.
So, with that final item, we come to the end of today's review of the. I'd like to thank my guest for today, Ms. Sama Eissa. She's an international.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And now, dear viewers, we'll go for a short break, and we'll be back with the breakfast show. So stay tuned.